I remember the exact moment I understood what no room really meant. It was November, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I was standing in the cereal aisle of the grocery store with my phone pressed to my ear and my daughter tugging at my coat. Emma was 4 then, still young enough to believe that family meant people who wanted you around. My son, Jacob, sat in the cart, quiet as always, his dark eyes watching me in that way children watch when they're learning to read sadness in their mother's face. "I'm sorry, sweetie," my mother said, and her voice had that particular texture it got when she was delivering news she'd already made peace with. "It's just that your brother and his family are coming, and you know how small the house is. We barely have room for everyone as it is." I stood there holding a box of off-brand cereal because the name brand was $2 more, and $2 mattered then. I stood there doing the math in my head. My parents' house had 4 bedrooms. My brother, his wife, and their one child would take 1 room. That left 3 bedrooms for 2 adults. But somehow there was no room for me and my 2 children.
"We could sleep on the couch," I said, and I heard myself saying it, heard the pleading in my voice, and felt something small and hard form in my chest. "The kids don't take up much space. We could—" "It's not just about sleeping arrangements," my mother interrupted gently. "It's about the chaos, honey. You know how your father gets with too much noise, and with the kids being so young." Emma pulled harder on my coat. A woman reached past me for the Cheerios, her cart full of name-brand everything, and I stepped aside to let her through. "Right," I said. "I understand." But I didn't understand, or maybe I understood too well. "We'll see you at Easter, though," my mother added brightly, as if this was a consolation, as if Easter was a promise instead of another date I'd likely spend alone. "That'll be wonderful." I said goodbye. I put the phone in my pocket. I finished shopping with Emma, asking me every few minutes when we'd see Grandma and Grandpa, and me giving her answers that weren't quite lies, but weren't quite truth either. "Soon, baby. We'll see them soon." That night, after I'd put the kids to bed in our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, the one with the radiator that clanked all nights and the neighbors who fought in Spanish I couldn't understand but recognized as pain anyway, I sat at our second-hand kitchen table and cried quietly into my hands. Not because it was the first time, but because I'd finally stopped being surprised. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from being erased slowly. It's not dramatic. There's no big fights, no slam door, no final cruel word that gives you something solid to push back against. It's gentler than that, quieter. They don't hate you. They just don't have room for you. And somehow, that's worse. Because how do you argue with logistics? How do you fight against square footage? The first time it happened, I was newly divorced, raw and shaking from the collapse of the life I'd tried to build. It was Christmas, and I'd asked if I could bring the kids to my parents' house for the holiday. Just for the day, I'd said, just so they could wake up somewhere that felt like family. My father had gotten on the phone. "Your mother and I talked it over," he said, "and we think it would be better if you did your own thing this year. You're starting a new chapter, after all. This could be a good opportunity for you to create your own traditions." New traditions, own traditions, the language of self-help books and empowerment used to dress up rejection in the clothes of wisdom. I'd tried. I really had. I bought a small tree at the discount lot where they sold the ones that were too sparse or too crooked for regular customers. I strung it with lights from the dollar store. I wrapped presents I couldn't afford in paper I'd saved from the year before. And on Christmas morning, Jacob, who was 6 then, had looked at the tree and said, "Mama, why don't we go to Grandma's like everybody else?" Everybody else. My brother and his perfect family with their matching Christmas pajamas and their annual photo in front of my parents' fireplace. The photo my mother would later post on Facebook with the caption, "Blessed to have family close by." Close by, meaning chosen, meaning wanted, meaning room had been found for them, measured out in love and logistics that worked when it mattered. I told Jacob we were making our own magic. I made hot chocolate and played Christmas music and tried to fill our small apartment with enough joy to make up for the space we'd been denied.
And when the kids were finally asleep, I sat by our crooked tree in the dark and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just a marriage, I'd already grieved that, but a place, a belonging, a family that made room. The pattern repeated itself. Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July. There was always a reason. The house was too small, too many people already. Dad wasn't feeling well and needed quiet. They were trying a new tradition this year, something simpler, just the four of them, my parents, my brother's family. My brother's family was always included in the count of who constituted just us. I stopped asking after a while, stopped calling to see if maybe this year would be different. I learned to make my own holidays, to cook turkeys that were too big for 3 people, to hide Easter eggs in our small living room, to tell my children that family was what we made it, not what we were born into. Emma stopped asking when we'd see Grandma. Jacob stopped drawing pictures to mail to them. We became our own universe, small and self-contained, orbiting at a distance from the family I'd been born into, but apparently not chosen by. I worked 2 jobs for a while, retail during the day, cleaning offices at night. I'd drop the kids at the before-school program and pick them up from the after-school program, and in between, I'd smile at customers and scrub toilets and save every dollar I could. Not for anything particular, just for space, for breathing room, for the possibility of something better than this endless treading water. My brother would call occasionally, his voice friendly and distant. He'd tell me about his promotion, his wife's new car, their vacation to Disney. He'd ask how I was doing with that distracted politeness people use when they're waiting for their turn to talk. And I'd give him the abbreviated version. Fine, busy, kids are good. And he'd say, that's great, and then he'd have to go. Once, just once, I asked him directly. We were on the phone. He'd called on my birthday, which he did most years, a checkbox on his calendar of family obligations. And after the pleasantries, I said, do you ever wonder why I'm never invited for holidays? There was a pause. I could hear his television in the background, some sports game, the crowd roaring. What do you mean? He said. You're always invited. No, I said quietly. I'm told there's no room, every time. Well, he said, and I could hear him shifting, uncomfortable. You know how it is. The house is small, and with kids and everything, it gets complicated. You have a kid, I pointed out. You managed to find room. That's different, he said, and he said it so quickly, so reflexively, that I knew he believed it. We live close by. We can help out. It's just easier. Easier? That word that means we prefer it this way. That word that means you're the complication we choose to avoid. I let it go. What else could I do? You can't force people to want you. You can't argue someone into love. But something shifted in me after that conversation. Some small, stubborn thing that had been hoping for change, waiting for recognition, finally went quiet. And in its place, something else grew. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. A clear-eyed understanding of where I stood and where I would never stand. So I stopped waiting for invitations. I stopped hoping that next year would be different. I took the energy I'd been spending on hoping and I put it toward building instead. I went back to school, online classes late at night after the kids were asleep, studying by the blue light of my laptop while my coffee went cold. I earned a certificate in medical billing and coding. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it paid better than retail and cleaning combined. I got a job at a hospital, daytime hours, benefits, a path forward. We moved to a better apartment. Not much better, still 2 bedrooms, still a tight squeeze, but in a safer neighborhood with better schools. I bought a real kitchen table, solid wood, not the folding card table we'd been using. I bought dishes that matched. I hung curtains that I'd picked out myself, not whatever was cheapest at the discount store. Small things, tiny victories, but they were mine. Emma started piano lessons. Jacob joined the soccer team. I packed their lunches in the mornings and helped with homework in the evenings and went to every recital and every game. I was there, always there, making room in my life for them the way my family had never made room for us. And slowly, So slowly, I barely noticed it happening. I stopped hurting when holidays came around. I stopped feeling that hollow ache when I saw other people's family photos on social media. I stopped wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve this distance. Because I'd done nothing wrong. That was the revelation. That was the shift. I'd done nothing wrong except be inconvenient, except need support when the people who were supposed to love me decided it was easier not to give it. My children were 7 and 9 when my mother called one October evening. I was making dinner, pasta with sauce from a jar, because it had been a long day and sometimes good enough is good enough. Emma was at the table doing math homework. Jacob was in his room, reading. I wanted to let you know, my mother said, her voice careful, that we're planning a big Thanksgiving this year, the whole family. It's been so long since we've all been together. I stirred the pasta, watching the water bubble. That sounds nice, I said. We'd love for you to come, she continued. You and the kids. It's time, don't you think? Time to let bygones be bygones. Bygones, as if the years of exclusion were some mutual disagreement we'd both participated in, as if I'd chosen this distance. Where would we sleep? I asked. Oh, well, she hesitated. You'd probably need to get a hotel, but you could come for dinner, spend the day. A hotel? Drive 3 hours each way, pay for a hotel I couldn't afford so we could attend a dinner where we'd be guests instead of family, where we'd be accommodated but not embraced, where there'd be room for us at the table but not in the heart of it. I'll have to check my schedule, I told her. Can I call you back? Of course, she said, sounding relieved as if my non-refusal was acceptance. I'll send you the details. I didn't call back, and when Thanksgiving came, I made a turkey for the 3 of us. We ate at our solid wood table with our matching dishes. We went around and said what we were grateful for. Emma said piano. Jacob said his new book series. I said them. Always them. My mother sent a group text the next day with photos from the dinner. My brother's family gathered around the table, my parents smiling at the head. Wonderful Thanksgiving with our loved ones, the caption read. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I deleted the text and went back to my life. That was the year I stopped being sad about it, the year I stopped feeling less than. They had their family, and I had mine, and mine was enough. Time has a strange way of changing things when you're not paying attention. You're too busy living, too focused on the small daily efforts of survival and growth, and then one day you look up and realize you're in a different place entirely. 3 years after that Thanksgiving invitation I declined, I got a promotion, then another one. I became a supervisor, then a manager. I made enough money to save, enough to plan, enough to imagine a future that wasn't just about getting through the next month. Emma was 12 by then, all long legs and opinions, learning how to be herself in the world. Jacob was 14, quieter than ever, but with a fierce intelligence that his teachers praised in conferences I never missed. They were good kids, not because they had to be, but because they'd learned early what it meant to be part of a team, to support each other, to make room for each other's needs. We'd become a unit, the 3 of us. We had inside jokes and traditions. We knew how to read each other's moods. We'd learned to communicate in the shorthand of people who've been through hard things together and come out closer for it. I didn't think about my parents much anymore. They were there, in the background of my life, sending birthday cards with checks that arrived a week late and posting photos of my brother's family at every holiday. But they'd become distant, like characters in a book I'd read long ago and barely remembered. Until I got the call about my father. It was my brother, his voice tight with stress. Dad had a heart attack, he said. He's stable now, but it was close. Mom's pretty shaken up. I sat down on my bed, my work clothes still on, my shoes still on, everything still on, because I hadn't been home long enough to take anything off. I'm sorry, I said. Is there anything I can do? They're talking about recovery time, lifestyle changes, all of that, he continued, barely acknowledging my question. Mom can't handle everything on her own. I'm trying to help, but with work and the kids. He trailed off. I waited. I was thinking, he said slowly, maybe you could come stay with them for a while, help out. You're in healthcare, right? You'd know what to do.
I was in medical billing. I sat at a computer all day processing insurance claims. But to him, healthcare was healthcare, all equally useful, all equally available to be called upon when convenient. I can't take time off work right now, I said, but I can come visit, bring the kids. I'm sure they'd like to see him. The kids, he repeated, and something in his voice made me sit up straighter. Mom was actually thinking it might be better if it's just you at first. You know, keep things calm. Dad needs rest. Too much noise. That's what my mother had said all those years ago. Too much chaos. Dad needs his rest. My kids aren't chaotic, I said quietly. They're teenagers. They know how to be quiet in a hospital. I didn't mean it like that, he backtracked. It's just, with everything going on. Tell Mom I hope Dad heals better, I said. But if my children aren't welcome, then neither am I. We're a package deal. There was silence on the other end. Then, carefully, you're really going to make this about you? Right now? Make this about me, as if I was the one who'd spent years drawing boundaries, defining who belonged and who didn't, as if I was the one who'd made room for some and not for others. Tell them I'll send a card, I said, and I hung up. I did send a card, a nice one with a heartfelt message about hoping for a speedy recovery. I included a drawing from Emma and a note from Jacob. I put our return address on the envelope so they'd know where we were, in case they ever wanted to know. My father recovered. My brother sent occasional updates in the family group chat that I'd muted years ago. Life went on. And then, 2 years later, I bought a house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly large, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with room for a garden, hardwood floors that caught the afternoon light, a kitchen with enough counter space to cook real meals. A living room where furniture could spread out instead of crowding together. Space. Real, actual, undeniable space. I stood in the empty living room on the day we got the keys, and I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been tight for so long, I'd forgotten it was there. It loosened. It breathed. Emma and Jacob ran through the rooms, their voices echoing off bare walls, claiming bedrooms and planning where everything would go. And I stood there listening to them, to their joy, to their freedom to take up space, and I thought about all those years of being told there wasn't room. There was room. There had always been room, just not for us. We moved in over a weekend. Friends from work helped, Cheryl, who'd become my closest confidant during lunch breaks, and Marcus from accounting, who had a truck and a generous heart. We packed and unpacked, hung pictures, assembled furniture. Emma picked out paint for her room, a soft lavender that made her smile every time she looked at it. Jacob wanted deep blue, like the ocean, he said, like possibility. I took my time with my room. I bought a real bed, queen-sized with a frame and a headboard. I hung curtains I'd chosen because they were beautiful, not because they were on sale. I put a chair in the corner by the window, a reading chair I called it, though really it was a thinking chair, a chair for sitting and looking out at the small yard and processing the fact that I'd done this. Against odds and exhaustion, against doubt and dismissal, I'd built something. We had a housewarming dinner on a Friday night, just the 3 of us, takeout Chinese on our new dining table, eating with the good plates I'd bought to celebrate. We raised our glasses of soda and toasted to new beginnings. To space, I said, and they laughed, but they understood. We all understood. I didn't tell my parents about the house at first. There was no particular reason to. We spoke rarely, exchanged pleasantries on birthdays and major holidays, maintained the fiction of connection without its substance. But Emma, with the social media enthusiasm of a teenager, posted photos of her room. And of course, my mother saw them. She called on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the backyard, pulling weeds from what would eventually be a garden, dirt under my fingernails, sun on my shoulders. "Emma's room looks lovely," my mother said after the usual greetings. "Is that a new apartment?" "A house," I said. "We bought a house." There was a pause. "A house," she repeated. "Well, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful." Her voice had that particular brightness that hid other feelings. Surprise, maybe? Or something else. Something that sounded like she was recalculating, reassessing. "Where is it?" she asked.
I told her, same town, better neighborhood, close to the kids' schools, close to my work. How many bedrooms? She asked. And there it was, the question underneath all questions. How much space? How much room? 3, I said, plus a finished basement that we're turning into a study area for the kids. 3 bedrooms, she said softly. That's plenty of space. I didn't say anything. I pulled another weed, watched a bird land on the fence. You know, she continued, your father and I were just talking about how we don't see enough of you and the children. Now that you have more room, maybe we could come visit sometime. Maybe stay for a weekend. Stay for a weekend? In my house? In the space I'd created, that I'd fought for, that I'd built from the ground up. There's not really room, I said quietly. The silence that followed was long enough for me to count my heartbeats. What do you mean? She asked finally. You just said you have 3 bedrooms. I have 3 bedrooms, I agreed. 1 for me, 1 for Emma, 1 for Jacob. We use every room. There's no guest room. But surely the kids could... They're 16 and 14, I interrupted gently. They're too old to share. They need their own space. We could get a hotel then, she offered, and I could hear her trying to find a way in, trying to find the room she'd never made for us, just to be closer so we could spend time together. I'll have to check my schedule, I said, and I heard my own words from years ago, that same polite deflection I'd learned from her. Can I call you back? Of course, she said, her voice small now, confused. I didn't call back, but she called again, and my brother called too, with that hearty, false cheerfulness he used when he was trying to smooth things over. Mom says you're being difficult about them visiting, he said. I'm not being difficult, I said. I'm just being honest about space. Come on, he scoffed. You have a 3-bedroom house. There's obviously room. Is there? I asked. Because for 20 years, a 4-bedroom house didn't have room for me and my kids. But somehow a 3-bedroom house should have room for everyone? That was different. How? I asked. Explain to me how it was different. He couldn't, or wouldn't. The conversation ended in uncomfortable silence and a mutual understanding that we were on opposite sides of something neither of us wanted to name. Thanksgiving came around again. This time I got a formal invitation in the mail. Cardstock, printed, addressed to Sarah and family in my mother's careful handwriting. You are cordially invited to Thanksgiving dinner at the home of Robert and Margaret Stevens. Please join us for a celebration of family and gratitude. Family and gratitude. I read those words several times, trying to find the irony in them, the self-awareness. But there was none. They genuinely didn't see it. They genuinely believed that this invitation, after all these years, was a gift, an offering, a bridge. I called my mother that evening. I got your invitation, I said. Oh, wonderful! She sounded genuinely pleased. So you'll come, all of you? Where will we sleep? I asked. Well, I thought, she paused, I thought maybe you'd drive back the same day, or there's that nice hotel on Route 9. So there's still no room, I said. It's not about room. It's always been about room, I interrupted. That's all it's ever been about. Who you make room for, who you choose to fit into your life. That's not fair, my mother said, and her voice cracked a little. We're trying to include you now. Now, I repeated, now that I have a house, now that I'm doing well, now that including me doesn't mean dealing with the messiness of my struggles, now you have room. You're twisting this. I'm telling you the truth, I said. For 20 years, my kids and I weren't convenient enough to make room for. We needed too much. We were too chaotic, too loud, too much work. And I accepted that. I made my peace with it. I built my own life, my own space, my own family. And now you want in? She was crying. I could hear it in her breathing. You're my daughter, she whispered. I know, I said. I've always been your daughter, even when there wasn't room for me. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. Emma was watching from the doorway, her face concerned. You okay, Mom? She asked. I looked at her, this beautiful girl who'd grown up knowing she was always wanted, always chosen, always given room. Yeah, baby, I'm okay. And I was. The holidays came and went. We made our own Thanksgiving, the three of us, and Cheryl and Marcus, who'd become more family than my blood relations ever were. We cooked too much food, and laughed too loud, and stayed up late playing board games. The house felt full. Not crowded, full. Christmas was similar. We decorated together, strung lights on the house, put up a tree that was perfectly straight and full. Emma played piano carols in the evenings. Jacob read his favorite holiday stories to us in dramatic voices that made us laugh. I baked cookies and wrapped presents and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. My parents sent presents, large boxes with expensive gifts and gift receipts in case we wanted to exchange them. There were no calls, no visits. Just things sent from a distance, as if objects could substitute for presents. I sent thank you cards, polite, warm, distant, the same tone they'd used with me for decades. Spring came, and with it, my father's birthday. My mother called to invite us to a party. Just family, she said, nothing big, but your father would love to see the kids. Would he, I wondered, would he really? Or was this another performance, another attempt to look like the family they'd never been? I'll ask them, I said. They're old enough to decide for themselves. I did ask them. That evening at dinner, I laid it out simply. Your grandparents want us to come to Grandpa's birthday party. I'll support whatever you want to do. Emma and Jacob looked at each other in that way siblings do when they're communicating without words. Do you want to go? Emma asked me. I want you to do what feels right for you, I said. This isn't about what I want. But they weren't nice to you, Jacob said quietly. For a long time, they made you sad. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized they'd understood so much. Hadn't realized they'd been paying attention during those years when I thought I was hiding the hurt. They're still your grandparents, I said, if you want a relationship with them. Do you, Emma interrupted, want a relationship with them? I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I want them in my life? Not the idea of them, parents, family, that Norman Rockwell fantasy of multi-generational love, but them, as they actually were, as they'd actually been. I think, I said slowly, that I've made peace with them being at a distance, but that doesn't have to be your choice. They were quiet for a while. Then Jacob said, we don't really know them. And Emma added, not like we know Marcus and Cheryl, not like we know our actual family. Our actual family, the one we'd built, the one that had made room. So that's a no? I asked. They nodded. I called my mother back. They don't want to go, I said simply. I'm sorry. You poisoned them against us, my mother said, and her voice wasn't sad anymore. It was angry, accusatory. You kept them from us. I kept them from nothing, I said. You were always welcome to be part of their lives. You chose not to be. Not when it mattered. Not when it was hard. Not when we needed you. That's not how it was. That's exactly how it was, I said. And now you want the good parts, the easy parts, the parts where they're older and easier and come with no demands. But it doesn't work that way. You don't get to skip the hard years and show up for the good ones. She hung up on me. I stood holding the phone for a long time, waiting to feel guilty, waiting to feel cruel, waiting to feel like I'd done something wrong. But I didn't feel any of those things. I felt clear. I felt certain. I felt like I'd finally told the truth out loud, and the truth, for all its sharpness, was also a relief. Summer came. I planted the garden I'd been planning, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Emma helped me dig the rows. Jacob built raised beds from lumber we bought at the hardware store. We worked in the sun, dirt under our nails, sweat on our foreheads, creating something from nothing. The house settled around us. We learned its sounds, the way the floorboards creaked in certain spots, the way the pipes hummed when someone showered, the way light moved through the rooms at different times of day. We filled it with life. Emma's piano music, Jacob's reading lamp glowing late into the night, dinner conversations that wandered from politics to philosophy to silly jokes that made no sense but made us laugh anyway. I started dating. Carefully, slowly, but I started. a man named David who worked in IT at the hospital, who was kind to my kids and didn't rush anything, who understood that we came as a unit, that you couldn't have me without having them, that there was no space in my life for someone who needed me to be smaller. My brother got married again, his second marriage. He sent an invitation, just to me, not the kids. Adults only affair, the invitation said. We hope you understand. I sent a gift. I didn't go. He called, hurt. I thought we've moved past all this, he said. Past what? I asked. This grudge, this anger, whatever you're holding on to. I'm not holding on to anything, I said. I'm just choosing where I spend my energy, and I'm choosing my kids the way you've always chosen yours. That's not the same. It's exactly the same, I said. You just don't like being on the other side of it. He didn't call again. Fall came around once more. Leaves turning gold and red, that particular slant of light that makes everything feel nostalgic. Emma was applying to colleges. Jacob was thinking about what he wanted to study, who he wanted to become. My children, who'd grown up in the margins of someone else's family, were becoming people who didn't even think about those margins anymore. They were centered in their own lives, secure in their own worth. That's when my mother called and asked if she could come for Christmas. Just me, she said. Your father isn't well enough to travel, but I thought maybe we could spend some time together. Just us. Just us. Those words that had always meant not you, now being used to mean only you. I almost said no, almost gave her the same polite deflection she'd given me for decades. But something stopped me, some small voice that said maybe this was different, maybe this was real. Where will you stay? I asked. I'll get a hotel, she said quickly. I don't want to impose. I just want to see you, see the kids, see your home. Your home. Not the house, not your place, your home. Okay, I said. You can come for Christmas, I told the kids that evening. They had mixed reactions. Emma was curious but cautious. Jacob was wary but willing. We talked about boundaries, about what we'd be comfortable with, about what would happen if she fell back into old patterns. We can handle this, Emma said. We're not little kids anymore. If it gets weird, we can deal with it. And if it goes well, I asked. They smiled. Then that's good too. My mother arrived 3 days before Christmas. I picked her up from her hotel, drove her to our house in the midday light that made everything look clean and possible. She was smaller than I remembered, older, grayer. She carried a bag of presents and wore the uncertain expression of someone stepping into unfamiliar territory. Your house is lovely, she said as I showed her in. And she said it like she meant it, like she was seeing it for the first time, even though Emma had posted dozens of photos online. But seeing it in person was different. Seeing the space we'd created, the life we'd built, the way every room held evidence of our family, that was different than seeing filtered photos on a screen. Emma came downstairs, polite but reserved. She shook my mother's hand. Hi, Grandma. Oh, you've gotten so tall, my mother said, and her voice caught. So beautiful. Jacob appeared from his realm, awkward in that teenage way, offering a small wave. My mother looked at him for a long moment, and I saw her seeing all the years she'd missed, all the moments she hadn't been there for, all the growth that had happened in her absence. We had coffee at the kitchen table, small talk at first, her trip, the weather, safe topics, but then she said, I owe you an apology. The kids glanced at me. I kept my face neutral. I'm listening, I said. She took a breath. I told myself for years that we were doing what was best, that your father needed quiet, that the house was too small, that it was complicated. But the truth is, she paused, looked down at her coffee. The truth is, we chose comfort over you. We chose easy over family, and I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. Emma and Jacob watched to see how I'd respond, what I'd do with this offering. Why now? I asked. Why say this now, after all these years? Because your father's sick, she said, really sick this time. And I'm sitting in that big house, in all those empty rooms, and I'm realizing what I gave up, who I gave up, and for what? For quiet? For space? For the illusion that smaller was simpler? She wiped her eyes. You built this beautiful life without us. You raised these incredible children without our help. You made room for yourself when we wouldn't make room for you. And I'm so proud of you, but I'm also so ashamed of myself. I felt something in my chest, not the hard thing from all those years ago, but something softer. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully, but an apology doesn't erase 20 years. I know, she said. I know it doesn't. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking if maybe, possibly, there might be room for me to try, to be the mother I should have been, the grandmother these kids deserved. Room, that word again. But this time, she was the one asking for it. She was the one standing on the outside, hoping to be let in. I looked at Emma and Jacob. They looked back at me with those steady gazes that said, "Your choice, Mom. We trust you." "You can try," I said finally. "But you need to understand something. This space, this life, this family, it's built on respect, on showing up, on being present even when it's inconvenient. If you want to be part of it, those are the requirements." "I understand," she said. "And if you can't do that," I continued, "if it gets too hard or too complicated or too much work, that's okay. But you walk away for good. No more half measures. No more showing up when it's easy and disappearing when it's not. All in or all out." She nodded. "All in," she said quietly. "I want to be all in." We spent Christmas together. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, stilted conversations, the feeling of people learning how to be with each other after years of distance. But there were good moments too. My mother helped Emma make cookies, using recipes from her own childhood. She sat with Jacob and listened to him explain his favorite book series with the kind of attention that made him glow. She did dishes without being asked. She laughed at our inside jokes even when she didn't quite understand them. On Christmas morning, we opened presents in our living room, the one with enough space for everyone, with sunlight streaming through windows that I'd chosen, in a house that I'd earned. My mother watched us with wet eyes and a soft smile, and I realized she was grieving. Grieving all the mornings like this that she'd missed, all the ordinary magic she'd traded for whatever comfort she thought she was getting. Before she left, she stood in the doorway with her coat on, her bag packed, her rental car warming up in the driveway. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me be here, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for showing up," I said, "for real this time." She hugged me, a long hug, the kind that says more than words, and then she was gone, back to her hotel, back to her life, back to my father and whatever future they had left. But something had shifted. Some door had opened, just a crack. Over the months that followed, my mother called regularly, really called, not just checking boxes, but actually talking. She asked about the kids' lives. She remembered details from previous conversations. She sent care packages, not because it was a holiday, but because she was thinking of us. She made plans to visit again and followed through on them. Slowly, carefully, we built something new. Not the mother-daughter relationship we might have had if she'd made different choices earlier, but something real nonetheless. Something based on truth and choice and the conscious decision to show up. My father didn't improve. He died the following fall, quietly, in the house that had always been too small for me. My mother called me at work, her voice shaky, and I left immediately. Drove the 3 hours I'd driven so many times in my head, but rarely in reality. Walked into the house I'd been excluded from, and found my mother sitting in the kitchen, small and lost. I sat with her, made her tea, called my brother to let him know. And when the funeral director came, I handled the details, because I knew how to handle hard things. I'd been doing it for years. At the funeral, people who barely knew me talked about what a good daughter I was, how strong I was, how much I must mean to my mother. And I stood there listening to them revise history, to create a narrative where I had always been present, always been included, always been wanted. But my mother knew better. And after the service, after everyone had gone, she turned to me and said, "I don't deserve you." "No," I agreed, "you don't, but here I am anyway." She cried then, really cried, for everything she'd lost, everything she'd given away, everything she'd realized too late. I drove home that evening as the sun set, the sky turning colors I didn't have names for. Emma and Jacob were waiting when I got home. They'd made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but made with love. made with the understanding that family shows up, family makes room. We ate together at our table in our house. We talked about Grandpa, about memories both real and imagined. We processed grief in the way we'd learned to process everything, together, honestly, with space for every feeling. After the kids went to bed, I sat in my reading chair by the window and looked out at the garden I'd planted. Most of the plants were done for the season, brown and withered, but next spring they'd come back. That's what gardens do. They die and resurrect. They require patience and faith and the belief that what you plant will grow. I thought about the girl I'd been, standing in a grocery store with a phone pressed to her ear and her children tugging at her coat. The girl who believed she'd done something wrong, who thought she was the problem, who internalized every rejection and wore it like a second skin. I wished I could go back and tell her, "You're not the problem." Their inability to make room for you says nothing about your worth and everything about their limitations. You will survive this. More than survive, you'll build something beautiful. You'll create space where there was none. You'll teach your children that family isn't about who shares your blood, but who chooses to share your life. You'll be okay. Better than okay. You'll be free. My mother sold the house the following spring. She said it was too big for her alone, which was ironic in ways I don't think she fully grasped. She moved to a small condo closer to us, not on our street, not in our pocket, but within visiting distance, within room-making distance. She came for dinner once a week. She learned our rhythms, our preferences, our boundaries. She learned to ask instead of assume, to respect instead of demand. She learned what it meant to be a guest in someone else's carefully built life. And over time, she stopped being just a guest. She became part of the pattern. Not the center, that was me and Emma and Jacob, but a welcome thread in the weave. She earned her place not through blood or obligation, but through consistent presence, through showing up even when it was inconvenient, through choosing us again and again. My brother and I maintained a cordial distance. We sent Christmas cards, we texted on birthdays, but we never returned to whatever we'd been before. Too much time had passed. Too many choices had been made. We were family in name, strangers in practice, and we were both okay with that. Emma went to college, a good school, not too far away, with a scholarship that covered most of the cost. Jacob was applying, making plans, becoming whoever he'd become. My children, who'd grown up knowing they always had room in my life, were preparing to take up space in the world. And me? I kept working, kept growing, kept building. David and I got serious, talking about future plans, about what it might look like to blend our lives. He understood about space, about how I'd fought for mine, about how carefully I guarded it, about how anyone who wanted into my life had to prove they'd make room rather than take it. On the anniversary of buying the house, I threw a party. Not big, just the people who mattered. Cheryl and Marcus and their families, my mother, David, Emma and Jacob and their friends. People who'd shown up for us, people who'd made room. We filled the house with laughter and music and food. We spilled into the backyard, onto the porch, into every corner of the space I'd created. And standing in the middle of it all, I felt something I'd never quite felt before. Not just contentment, not just peace, but a bone-deep certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that I'd built exactly what I needed to build, that the years of exclusion hadn't broken me, they'd clarified me, they'd shown me what mattered, not the space you're given, but the space you create, not the family you're born into, but the family you build, not the room others make for you, but the room you make for yourself and the people you choose to let in. As the evening wound down and people started leaving, my mother approached me with a thoughtful look. "You did this," she said, gesturing to the house, the garden, the lingering warmth of community. "All of this, without us." "Yes," I said simply. "I'm sorry we weren't there to help you build it," she said. "I'm not," I replied, and I meant it. "If you'd been there, I might have built something smaller, something that fit what you thought I deserved, instead of what I knew I needed." She nodded slowly. "You're stronger than I ever was." "No," I said. "I just learned earlier what you learned late, that you can't wait for people to make room for you. You have to make it yourself."
She hugged me then, and I hugged her back, not with the desperation of someone who'd been starved for affection, but with the generosity of someone who had enough to give. Later, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I walked through each room turning off lights. The kitchen where we'd shared so many meals, the living room where we'd laughed and cried and processed life together, Emma's room with her lavender walls and dreams of the future, Jacob's room with his books and his quiet brilliance, my room with my reading chair and my hard-won peace. I stopped in the doorway of each room and felt the weight of it, not the burden, but the substance, the realness of what we'd built, the undeniable truth that we existed, that we mattered, that we'd created something that couldn't be erased or excluded or diminished. This space, this life, this family, all of it built from the raw material of rejection, all of it transformed by the alchemy of choice and resilience and the stubborn insistence that we deserved better than what we'd been offered. I turned off the last light and stood in the darkness for a moment, feeling the house breathe around me, feeling the presence of everyone who'd ever made room for us, not in their houses necessarily, but in their hearts, feeling the absence of everyone who hadn't, and finding that absence didn't hurt anymore. It just was. A fact. A chapter in a story that had moved on to better pages. I climbed into my bed, my queen-sized bed with its real frame and comfortable mattress, and pulled the covers up to my chin. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and make breakfast. I'd pack Emma's lunch for her college classes. I'd help Jacob with his applications. I'd go to work and come home and live my ordinary, extraordinary life. But tonight, I just lay there in the dark and felt grateful. Not for the exclusion, I'd never be grateful for that, but for what it had taught me, for who it had made me, for the clarity it had given me about what mattered and what didn't, for the understanding that sometimes the greatest gift people give you is showing you exactly who they are, and sometimes the greatest gift you give yourself is believing them and building accordingly. I fell asleep smiling, in my house, in my space, in my life, in the room I'd made for peace and for love and for the family I'd chosen. And in the morning, I'd wake up and make room for another day of that choice, another day of living in the space I'd created, another day of being exactly who I'd fought to become, not someone waiting to be included, but someone who'd learned to include herself, to make room for her own dreams, her own needs, her own joy. Someone who'd learned that family isn't about who has space for you in their house, it's about who you make space for in your heart. And my heart, for all it had been through, had plenty of room for the right people. The garden would bloom again in spring. The house would fill with more laughter, more meals, more ordinary moments that add up to a life. Emma would graduate, Jacob would grow, my mother would continue showing up, David and I would keep building our future. The story would go on, as stories do, with all its complications and joys and unexpected grace. But this chapter, this particular arc of pain, transformed into power, this was complete. I'd spent years being told there was no room for me, so I built a space big enough for peace and small enough for only love to fit.